So things as cost control, making sure you have the right sales channels. These things are more and more important, and especially with investors, that they really want to make sure there is no room for error. It becomes really important to have, as a startup, have everything in order. The biggest room for improvement we see in distribution, because it can be very unclear for brands. Where is the product going? Where is it selling well? They basically ship product to the distributor and give a lot of power to the distributor because it's sort of a black box, it's unknown. So what we see now more and more are blockchain technology distributors that use the technology, so have complete visibility of when and how the product is being delivered. And this way, it's much more cost efficient.
Hello again, this is Chris Rechkowski. We're here with the FutureFoodCast, where we speak with thought leaders from around the world that are telling us about the trends in technology and what's happening in the future for food and restaurants and what we're consuming at home. Happy to be here today with Bernard Verkaaik, who is with Greater Goods, a really interesting sort of consulting advisory firm for startups in the food space. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much.
Now, we've had a bit of chance to discuss before, starting this podcast, and really interesting to learn where you came from and how you got into starting this company and why you started this company. And I wonder if you could tell our audience a little bit about your background and what motivated you to start the Greater Goods.
Yeah, so I'm originally from the Netherlands, and I came to Canada in the early 2000s and trying to find a job. And then I landed in the food industry. There was a gentleman that trained me and showed me everything that I needed to know about the food industry, and slowly worked my way up in the food industry. So this was for an importer distributor. Then I started working for a food manufacturer called Barry Callebaut. It's the largest chocolate manufacturer. And learning, really understanding the food industry, the supply, the manufacturing, the sales, working with retailers. And what I noticed is that there was no support for food startups. So often I would see these amazing brands, or they would reach out to me, but I always saw a challenge of launching or going to the market as a startup company. And 4 years ago, I decided to start my own business and starting helping those people. Because walking into the grocery aisle, I would always see the big brands represented. And I noticed that it's very difficult for startups to navigate through the system and try to make it successfully in the grocery store. And I started helping these startup companies, and it's been a great journey.
Excellent. And you of course, we couldn't have predicted it, but you started all this at a very interesting time. And starting 4 years ago, you've had the good experience of what we used to call the normal economy, and almost 2 years now of the new economy. And I'm curious, tell us a little bit about that transition for you and what it meant to your businesses, especially the startups you're working with, and how have they essentially, probably all of them, had to pivot and deal with what's happening during the current pandemic sort of business style, if you will.
Yeah, that's correct. And also the people we noticed during the midst of the pandemic that also food service companies started reaching out to us that wanted to launch into retail, realized that they had a high risk by only selling food service. So we also started supporting those companies. And for startups, what we noticed is that investors were more concerned. We're really looking for expertise and performance. So we also work with investors that have their own brands and want to make sure that they perform well. So what we noticed is that everything became really important. So things as cost control, making sure you have the right sales channels. And that's something where we help people the most with, is what we realize is that there's simply not enough margin for the brand to expand or to grow or to be profitable. So these things we started addressing by sourcing, getting more direct sources, lowering their costs, negotiating their manufacturing contracts, setting up other ways of manufacturing, reformulating to make sure that the cost is as low as possible. So we noticed that during the pandemic, and I think that will continue, is that these things are more and more important, and especially with investors, that they really want to make sure there is no room for error. And it becomes really important to have, as a startup, have everything in order before you go to market or when you are in the market.
And you know, working with startups, I've been in a bunch of startups myself, and one of the painful things that we all learn very quickly is, as you indicated, there's a very high failure rate of startups. That's just the way it goes. But you're also, it sounds like, working with companies that have investors behind them, not just probably the entrepreneurs that are funding their own ventures, but maybe sort of independent investors. And how are they getting comfortable, or even maybe demanding, that their companies are working with a company like yourself who has long experience? And what do those investors see that you're bringing to the business that's going to be worth the cost and worth the time for their entrepreneurs to be spending with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we see is that what's really important is a speed to market. So for example, we helped to launch a baking mix during the pandemic because people started gravitating towards home baking and were looking for healthy options, which were often not available. So we helped to launch a brand that is sugar-free, gluten-free, delicious, beautiful packaging, and really enhancing the category. So we were able to launch this in 5 months. And typically what you see, so we get a lot of calls from entrepreneurs. They call us, they're 2 years into their business, and they basically have no sales. They're in debt. Usually they spend around $100,000, $150,000, and there's just no results. So what we started doing is addressing the points why startups are failing. So we noticed that about 85% of food startups are failing, which is such a high number. And we started addressing the points why they're failing. And one of the biggest point is the market fit. So we noticed that the product, the way it is, and it could be the marketing, could be the branding, could be the product itself, could be the pricing, is not a market fit. So what we did, we created a very specific model where we incorporate the retailers into the decision-making process. So what we do before a company starts heavily investing, we develop the concept, we do the research, and then present it to the retailers and ask them for their feedback, their opinion before we launched. Is the price point correct? Would you like to see different certifications? Would you put this on your shelf? Is there something else you would like to see? Just to make sure when you launch a product, you can see a level of success right away.
Excellent. And you know, one thing I find interesting is that woven into your discussion here is very important trends in the market, which I think you as an expert in advising your companies, it's like breathing for you, it's natural. But we want to peel back a little bit of that and what you see as these trends that you're advising your clients toward. For example, there wasn't a trend of, there should be cupcakes, but what is the content? What is the nutritional value of that? What are people's interests in terms of gluten-free, plant-based, these types of things? How do these trends inform what you're doing? And what, I guess, even more importantly, what do you see are the key trends that are leading your guidance to the startups you're working with in the food space?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest trends that we see is good for you products. So these are variations of products that are doing well, that a lot of people buy, but contain a lot of sugar or other additives. So we see real trends of popular food items that are being developed as good for you. Of course, we see a lot of vegan products, and that's where also retailers come to us, because what happens is that a large food company, they look at the trends and they analyze the trends, but it's a big investment and a commitment for big food companies to play on those trends. So consumers are looking for certain products, but it takes about 2 years for it to show up in grocery stores. So when we're talking to the grocery trade, they tell us what they're looking for and what they can't get. And this is how we play on the trends, where we bring, so typically in about 5 to 6 months, we bring those products to them in the way that they're looking for. So what I'm trying to say is that a typical grocery store is not reflecting exactly what the consumers are looking for. And COVID has brought a lot of awareness for wellness and products of products that are just simply not good for you. So people are really gravitating towards those alternatives.
Right. And another sort of aspect of this that we hear a lot in our discussions on this podcast is consumer interest in transparency. It's one thing to advertise that it's gluten-free or non-GMO, plant-based, but sometimes consumers, especially when, for example, we talk about organic, it's really hard to convince consumers why should they pay an extra 10% or 100% for something organic. And how do you address that question of transparency with the brands or the companies that you're working with, so that the customers are comfortable that they're getting what they read on the packaging?
Yeah, this is really important. That's a very good point. So what we also see is that consumers would like to buy from real people. So the people that we work with, they have their own health journey or issues which they're trying to work through, and they developed a product based on that. So they're just like anybody else. So people like to connect with the owners and the reason why they started their company and brought the company or the product to the market. And then other than that, it's using the right sources and also ingredients, very clean ingredients, local as much as possible. So people understand where, like it's a short supply chain, because right now it's very difficult to get products from overseas, ingredients from overseas, packaging. There are long lead times, and people really like to see locally sourced. So we're helping also companies to reformulate right now and get that local source, so they can slowly get away from the long lead times and the uncertainty of getting ingredients. Right. And then, of course, besides that, because we work with startups, we like to work with certifying bodies such as non-GMO Project Verified or organic, so people understand that these brands that they might not know really work according to a standard.
So you mentioned a couple things in there. The word organic will, I'm sure, come up always when we're talking about food, but also buying local and supply chains. And at the end of the day, sometimes for some people, this is related to sustainability and this larger question of environmental sustainability that is certainly at the top of many people's minds today. But how do you see that reflected in consumer demand, in interest in sustainability or not, in the case of their purchasing decisions?
Yeah, we really see that, and especially in the good for you sector, where people are looking for healthy products, and they find recyclable packaging or biodegradable very important, because when they take it home, they would like to maybe reuse the glass jar, clean it out and use it for another purpose, or they want to make sure that it is recyclable when they put it in the recyclable bin, because they want to do their part to make the world a better place. So it's very important, and you'll see that more and more. And if you start addressing that and acknowledging that it's not only about bringing a product at the most possible or the lowest price, but it's really important to focus on those values and show them when you bring your product to the market.
Okay. Well, I think a little bit later in this discussion, I'd like to dig into how technology is playing into some of these decisions and how it's communicating both information to consumers, but also feedback from consumers and supply chain to the producers. But one of the key values, I think, of your company is how are you helping companies navigate the hazards in not being one of the 85% that fail? That's, of course, a key value that you're bringing. And, what are the tools that you use or the experience you use to work with the company to say, let's focus on these key things and make sure we do them or don't do them so that you'll be successful?
As part of our team, everybody has an area of expertise. So this could be manufacturing, sourcing, product development, regulatory. So all those fields are very important. So what we typically do is look at the foundation of the company. So it starts with pricing. So people typically don't know if you're selling something or it's in the store for, let's say, $4.99. The costing cannot exceed about $1.50, and it's really important to understand. So when you know that you can only get so much for your product, to work back and make sure that the costing is addressed before you start producing, and making sure that you so what we do, we lay out the costing, we show them the cost of production, cost of having a broker, the promotional activities that are required to launch your brand, and having a full understanding of your costing model before you start. And if ingredients are not in line with your costing, making sure that you make the tweaks or the changes before you launch your product. So this way, when you go to the market, it is completely aligned with the pricing. And then also what we often see is that that the branding, so people are very excited about their products. They create a beautiful label. They're really excited, but typically a consumer walks into the grocery aisle, takes 2 seconds to make a purchasing decision. So it's really important to understand the psychology behind it. Like, how can you express the feeling and the trust, and for people to understand that this product has value to them. So making sure that that whole foundation is in place before you go to market.
Right. Well, as with all parts of our lives today, it seems like technology is increasingly leading all that we do. And I'd like to discuss a little bit about how are you using new technologies to innovate and basically realize the trends that you see developing, and how is that helping your customers who are these entrepreneurs? What are the key technologies that you're working with right now?
Yeah, so typically in the food industry, what we see, especially at the grocery and distribution level, we see that it's still not a lot of technology is being used, which is very unfortunate. It's very hands-on, traditional industry. So what we started using is a artificial intelligence software. We partnered up with a company, and what that does, we use this technology to map out and determine which stores geographically are the best stores to launch the product in. So this way we give the brand owners a tool, but also we give the retailers directions, because if they have a grocery, let's say I have 1,000 grocery stores, we can indicate to them, these are the 400 stores you should be launching in. This is why. This is the type of consumer that connects with our product, and then also use social media and geo-marketing to target those consumers. So this way you get a better sell-through rate, a better relationship with the retailer. So this is how we start to incorporate the technology to help brands better.
Interesting. This is certainly one of the first cases for these podcasts I've seen of incorporating AI into the process. And what kind of advantages does that give you in terms of, bringing value to your customers versus not having that tool available, say, 2 years ago?
Yeah, it was very difficult to determine the launch strategy. And so often what would happen is we would launch in a lot of stores, but then we saw no sell-through rate in certain stores. So it's fairly easy to open up stores and get it in there, but to sell it through can be a challenge. So after working with brands, after a few years, we noticed that that was not the right strategy, but we had no tools to sort of making sure where is the product going to be successful. So it really changed our approach and helped brands to spend their money wisely and getting success quicker.
Of course. Now, a while back in this discussion, you also mentioned the costing challenges, especially for entrepreneurs that might be new to the food space and really don't understand what the cost structure of their product needs to be to achieve their margins that they want to see, or have margins even, probably in some cases. What types of technologies do you see either available today or coming in the near term that are going to be helping producers to manage their costs, manage transparency in production, raw materials, supply chain, and improve, frankly, their business overall?
Yeah, where we see the biggest, if I look overall over the costs that are involved, the biggest room for improvement we see in distribution, because it can be very unclear for brands, where is the product going, where is it selling well. They basically ship product to the distributor and give a lot of power to the distributor because it's sort of a black box, it's unknown. So what we see now more and more are blockchain technology distributors that use the technology. So we work with a distributor that has a model. It's a virtual pass-through. So what they use excess capacity trucks that are available. So basically, as a brand owner, you keep ownership of the product and see it through all the way to the end user, and have complete visibility of when and how the product is being delivered. And this way, it's much more cost efficient. So a typical distributor would work on 25%, and this type of model can be close to 10%, so which is quite a saving. And as you start to set up your food business, or you're in the market, you see if you can take out that 15%, that's huge. That is a tremendous impact.
Yeah, well, that's a great advancement for, especially again, the entrepreneurs who, I think with your guidance are starting this from the beginning and not having to figure it out 2 years into their journey, where they then have to restructure, their entire ERP systems and just way of doing business to integrate that. So excellent for you to be bringing that to them on the cost management. Do you also see ways, and you mentioned blockchain as a way of providing transparency to the product manufacturer, but if and how can this provide transparency to the end user in your experience, or end consumer of the food products?
Yeah, it's I've seen a few companies that are really trying to. I worked with a startup company that wanted to bring a cookie mix to the market and really identify and show the different ingredients, exactly where they're coming from. Sometimes this can be difficult for companies to compete because what happens is that you want to have multiple sources available just in case you run out, or to make sure there's no disruption in the supply chain. And let's say for this cookie company, if they're using chocolate, it can be very difficult to trace back exactly where that product is coming from. So I think blockchain technology, as it develops, can really help to show that visibility. And this might be still the old approach where not all sources are being revealed, because especially distributors or importers, that's traditionally their role, where they bring in ingredients and they supply, or they supply under private label. So it's still a shift needs to happen in the food industry to open up that transparency, where they can really start embracing blockchain technology. But you see some companies really embracing it, which is fantastic.
Well, you mentioned a very important product there, chocolate. And looking at your background, I recall you have some deep expertise in this area. And this is also, one of the prototypical products, raw materials that people look at in terms of the beginning part of this food chain, where it's produced, and concepts of fair trade, fair wages, food quality, organic, et cetera. And that's something that's just super not transparent to not only consumers, but I think even the companies that are buying the product. And as you've explained, it's a great value to for both end consumers and the manufacturers to understand that. But how do you think that might, if using blockchain and technologies, and a consumer is able to actually, if you will, look back and say, oh, this particular product came from this particular area, and in fact, I might even not know them, but be able to understand who were the farmers and workers on this farm. What do you see as being possible in that as a way of encouraging both producers to use those products, but also as new ways of marketing to end consumers, knowing who the producers are of their products?
Yeah, so I think new startups and newer companies that are entering the market are really embracing that and seeing that as an opportunity to grow or to show the transparency. It's still because the way the food industry is structured, I think it's still a challenge to do so. So I think we need a little bit more of those trailblazers that really start opening that up. And I think as soon as other companies see the value, where the consumer is really understanding, just like you mentioned, where the product is coming from, and feel really safe and secure about consuming the product. So I think that's still a change that needs to happen because it's very traditional, but I think it can be fairly easy adopted. Maybe chocolate is not the greatest example. For example, grains or produce, those are easier items. So chocolates, they're all little micro farmers. So I think in Ivory Coast, which is the main source of cocoa, there are about 30,000 different farmers. So it's very difficult to trace that sort of product back. But I think if we start with other essential items, essential ingredients that are in products, then this can follow.
And you mentioned grains, and we have an opportunity to talk to all sorts of different food companies, if you will, here. And I actually heard of here in Canada, one craft beer manufacturer that is apparently tracking grains that they're using for their production of their craft beers. Do you see that in your region, say in Canada, of that activity of really? Well, one, we mentioned buying local. It's, I guess, much easier to understand your supply chain if a cheese comes from a farm 10 kilometers down the road to your restaurant. That's pretty clear. But what do you see as opportunities or even emerging activities in ability to track raw materials, let's say nationally? Let's forget about going across borders, but just nationally in Canada.
Yeah, we see. I see a collaboration with ingredient suppliers and with producers of product. So, for example, a very popular item in Ontario, Canada, are butter tarts. And butter tarts, one of our clients is making it with honey, and then a real specific honey in their Muskoka area where they partner up with, so people can really identify where this honey is coming from, because honey is one of those items that it's often brought from China, is being blended, no different than olive oil is another item that's really being blended. So certain ingredients are, I think, where consumers really want to know where this is coming from. And of course, an organic certification helps, but there's a cost associated to it. Not everybody likes to buy organic, but just to understand where the food is coming from and the safety. So you see small initiatives where transparency is being offered, and that's really the trend. So I think now it's time for the food industry to start embracing this technology so they can take it to the next level.
Yeah, that's another great point that we could certainly dive into, the issues of blending, especially because often it's not known and not actually properly advertised. And certainly, with a truly transparent, say, blockchain-based supply chain, I think both the producers and the end consumers would have more confidence in that. Now, let's maybe go back and focus again a little bit on sort of back to trends, back to what is the future of food that you see with the companies that you're advising, whether it's exact case studies or just general trends that you see. What do you expect us to be talking about 1, 2, 3 years from now in terms of this is what people want today? There's probably continued interest in GMOs, organic, these types of things, but any areas that you think might surprise us that are going to be coming up?
Yeah, I think the health trend is really going to continue. I think COVID really uncovered the importance of being healthy and staying healthy. So I think people are really, and the things that we talked about with the transparency, people want to understand where food is coming from. Also, supply chain is facing a real issue. There is a shortages. We see this in the US where shelves are empty. So there's a real concern on where product is coming from, where product is being sourced. So I think the real trend that we're going to see is local growing of ingredients, and the local grocery store where I shop, it's an independently owned, and they work directly with the farmers. And often when you're there, you see the farmer delivering the product, the eggs, the meat, the produce. So I think that local connection, that's a real trend that's going to continue. I think we'll see also a trend in functional foods where people understand their well-being. So maybe alcohol, sugar, coffee are not the greatest food items for you. So you see now where you add function into a coffee. So where you get the energy, but where they add different blends of mushrooms, adaptogenics. So I think those are the trends that you're going to see.
And I think that's certainly a word that I've heard a lot in, say, talking with food experts, functional, but it's not something that you hear very much outside of, sort of the experts, such as yourself, other than maybe at the extreme end with sports athletes, these types of things. What do you see as the key functional nutrients or functional foods that we might see more of in the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, I think it's the replacement of foods, but then in a healthy way. So as an example, we're helping now to launch a Gatorade alternative, so replacement with just a few pure ingredients where people really understand, oh, this is the function, but it has a natural source. So I think that's what you'll see functional foods going. And of course, functional foods is a term being used by marketeers or people in the industry, but it's really when on a daily basis, when I go about my day, before people would say, oh, I'm tired, I'll have a coffee, or in the afternoon, I'll have a sugary treat. And now they're saying, oh, how can I make sure I sustain my energy and I don't get burned out? And because people are stressed, people are staying home because of COVID, they feel sort of helpless. There's a lot of, there's also mental health issues are coming up. So how can I have a proper diet that supports me in my stressful life, or how can I sort of use or work with foods as, I don't want to say a medicine, but helping me feel good and making sure that I'm nourished throughout the day. So I think you'll see a shift where people have more awareness of what they're eating and being more mindful.
And it sounds like also, like you said, it's not necessarily a medicine or different medicinal components in food, but is it maybe that people are more conscious of putting less manufactured chemicals in their body and more interested in still wanting some positive effects, but wanting that to come from natural sources? You mentioned mushrooms and maybe other things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, and number one, food always has to taste good because people really like to enjoy food. So if you have food that's really good for you, or create a product but just doesn't taste good, that's not something what people are looking for. But I think absolutely ingredients that they can pronounce, that they understand, that they know what's in the product, and that's part of the transparency and also the blockchain that you mentioned, the component.
Good. Well, your company, I think, is certainly filling an important niche here in Canada. And you mentioned you have quite a number of people involved. How do you see your experience in Europe maybe being different than what we're experiencing here in Canada or North America?
Yeah, there are different trends in Europe, as well as the US and Canada. So that's also one of the reasons last year we opened up an office in Europe, because we recognize there's a lot of innovation in US and Canada, but it can be challenging to go into Europe because it's a very different market. But the market size is actually bigger than the US. And also from a technical point of view, so if you have a brand in the US and Canada, you pay fees to get listed into a store. They don't exist in the European market. So it's can be very easy to expand. So that's the reason why we opened up an office and are supporting US and Canadian brands. And so what we see is that because the trends are different in Europe, where certain things they are, because of their supply chain is very tight, very organized because of the way Europeans live. Also, certain products have a certain health focus because of a different lifestyle. But there are very unique products in US and Canada that can do very well in those markets, and that's what we help to identify and bring them to the market as well.
Well, that's certainly your expertise in working with these globally diverse entrepreneurs and helping them enter new markets. And because you have that experience, we're talking a lot about different technologies that not only are the future of food, but also enabling the future of food to diversify. Do you see a different acceptance or adoption rate, if you will, for different technologies in Europe versus North America? Or do you see the acceptance being fairly similar?
Yeah, I think in Europe, technology is being embraced more quicker. And I think it also has to do with the need. So things as blockchain or a very tight supply chain, that's already has been addressed years ago. And it's just because the square footage in the store or the rent for retail space is very expensive because there's limited space. So there's more need to be very creative and to make sure that all areas of costing are being addressed. So I think especially the pandemic brought a lot of awareness for US and Canadian companies to make sure that all those things are addressed and margin is addressed. So I think technology, we can take a look at Europe and see how they go about with technology. And there's definitely things that we can learn from them.
Well, I think we've had a chance to cover some great topics here today, and our viewers have seen that not only do you have tremendous expertise in advising startups in North America, but from the European side as well, and really helping these companies to understand where they should be moving and the regions that they should be focusing on. And the uses, again, really impressed with your uses of technology and using AI to actually help your customers versus just talking about a technology. Very, very impressive. So I hope some of our viewers are seeing this and saying, we're going to go out and we're going to find Bernard because he's going to help us with our startup business, or even medium to large size companies that need some of this capability.
Absolutely.
Well, with that, Bernard, thank you very much for joining us today. Really exciting to see what the Greater Goods is doing. And maybe we'll have you back again in the future. And next year, we'll see, as we emerge from COVID, hear more about the trends of both the successes that you're having with your entrepreneurs, but also the new ones you see coming out as we move into whatever the next phase is of our food consuming world.
That would be wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. at your
Excellent.
podcast. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks again, and you have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.